again, my disclaimer that I tell you this, I'm not an academic, I'm not a historian. I'm basically that kind of people everybody loves to hate, the journalist who, a master of none but jack of all. I know a little bit about a lot of things, but I'm pretty good at sifting through information and putting it into something that's comprehensive. There won't be a test, either this week or even at the end of the voyage, so just enjoy all of this. I kind of do it with a little touch of humor, and I kind of skim over a lot of things. I'm not into facts and figures and long stories about this particular part or that particular part. So I'm going to give you broad brush strokes. Mozambique is an interesting case. In many ways, it's the poster child of modern Africa. It was a colony, I'll talk a little bit more about that, of Portugal for a very long time. It went through a terrible civil war, a dreadful civil war, first to throw off the yoke of colonialism and then to decide what sort of government they would have. In some cases, it's still going on today. So in many ways, this is very similar to what's happening at one level or another throughout sub-Saharan Africa. And on this voyage, we're mostly talking about what is known as sub-Saharan Africa. That's below obviously below the Sahara Desert. So we don't talk about the Middle East or North Africa. This is below the desert. This is, for want of a better term, Black Africa, the dark continent. It's been called many, many different things. But Mozambique is particularly interesting, and I chose this picture to start with. That's the flag painted on the woman's face. And it's not by accident that she has green eyes. The Portuguese were there for over 400 years. And so their genes have influenced and spread out into the country as well. So it's a country of mixed races, much like South Africa. The colors, I think, are also great for a flag. That's the flag that's painted on her face. But I point particularly to her cheek there. That's actually the emblem on the Mozambican flag. And I think it sums up much of Africa from about 1980 to the present time. It's two crossed implements, the as, which is in essence, the plow of Africa. It is the tool of agriculture. And the other item is an AK-47 assault rifle. And I think the two together really do sum up Mozambique and its problems, and both its problems and what's working for the country today. It's a terrific uphill struggle. So let's go on and look a little bit at Mozambique. Just, you know, you've seen the map. You saw it when you booked the flight or booked the cruise, and you can see where it sits, but just as a quick reminder, it's on the Indian Ocean. Tanzania is to the north. Malawi and Zambia is to the northwest. Zimbabwe to the west. Swaziland and South Africa to the southwest. The capital and largest city is where we're going, Maputo. And it's down there, those of you who haven't looked at the map, it's way down at the lower end of the country, just very close to the South African border. It's a stunningly beautiful country. If you've looked at any pictures, you have to have been impressed by this country. To the north and to the west are mountains. And I'm not talking little hills. I'm talking serious mountains with snow on them, almost alpine in nature, with its own ecosphere and environment up there. Those lead down into a huge number of a vast expanse in the center of the country of what's known as open savanna. It's mixed in with some forest, but it's mostly dry. This is where most of the animals are. It is noted for its wild game parks. This is a cheetah with, can anybody tell me what that cheetah is carrying in its mouth? Impala, right. We're going to get very good at spotting impalas, aren't we? Mozambique has some of the finest game in the world. One of the problems that it faces during this long, terrible civil war, the fighting, which ranged from guerrilla-type activity to open, modern armed combat with fighter jets and bombing and all of the accoutrements that go with that. The land was sprinkled with landmines everywhere. They also put up, right after the revolution, in the 1990s, they put up fences all over along the border, presumably to just sort of say, here's our border, but nobody thought about the animals. In the last 2 years, Mozambique has joined the move toward that elephant trail or animal trail that we talked about the other day. She's taken down all of her fences. They've hired teams of people to come in, and they've gotten rid of as many of the landmines as they can find. Unfortunately, in wars today, no one makes a note of where they put the landmines. Any of you who've been to the Falkland Islands know that they're still digging up landmines and have teams there trying to find where the landmines are all over the Falkland Islands. And the same thing was here. But I'm glad to say that the Mozambican government has now begun to buy into this. They've taken down, now the animals can roam freely from Kruger Park in South Africa directly through the passes and down into the savannas of Mozambique. Good news on that front. And from the savannah, it leads down to an absolutely spectacular coast. It's about, the country is about twice the size of California. It has about a 450 mile coastline, and it's like a necklace of beautiful little islands, all undeveloped or almost no development. The Europeans, especially of course the Portuguese, began to develop the area even near the end of the war. So there are nice hotels, but count on this part of Mozambique becoming a great tourist destination in the years to come. You will see it as we come in, you'll see it as we leave, and you'll see a lot of pictures of it. Some of you may even be doing excursions out to the islands. The diving here is phenomenal. Absolutely, probably one of the top 5 spots in the world for scuba diving. The people of Mozambique are primarily Bantu, from the Bantu tribe. In the prehistory times, the people who filtered down towards the coastline here, and the agriculture in the terrain and the environment for agriculture is quite good, were Bantu, who pushed in from the north and from the west. Also along the coast came the Arab slavers. Even before the Portuguese came, they were working their way down the coast and used Mozambique as a port. They would gather slaves from all across Africa, but they would ship them out of Mozambique and bring them north to the slave markets of the Middle East and in the Arab world. The main religion is Christianity. About 55%, the majority of which are Roman Catholic. That would reflect, of course, the Portuguese involvement in the country. Islam only takes up about 20%. The people are warm and friendly and welcoming and rather happy, but living in somewhat difficult conditions. The money is hard to find and jobs are scarce. The language, the official language, is Portuguese. So how many of you here speak Portuguese? Uh-huh. Yeah, I'm about that same boat too. I've got like 3 words and I probably mispronounce those. It's okay. You're going to be in tourism areas, and the majority of the people will speak some kind of English. You can use a Google Translator if that's a thing, and sign language always works. But Portuguese is what they speak. So, how did the Europeans and when did they get here? Our friend Mr. da Gama, who will come up, Vasco da Gama, out of Prince Henry's navigation school, part of that push out from Portugal in the late 15th century. In 1498, as Joe mentioned yesterday, they got down to the Cape. In the case of da Gama, he looked at the Cape area and thought, nobody here, kind of barren, not much going on, let's keep going. They were looking for the spices of the East and the wealth of the East. And so they began to work up the coast. In those days, you didn't push out into the open ocean. It's called coastal sailing. You went, each night you anchored in some bay or sailed always within sight of land, because out there be monsters and sea monsters and devils, so they didn't go out there. Da Gama came in 1498, claimed it for Portugal, didn't stick around very long. He was headed around the world. But by 1505, the Portuguese had settled it as a colony, had started a city, and the primary purpose for them was slaves. We tend to forget that Europe was very much involved in the slave trade in those years, from about, well, once they discovered Africa, slavery was an accepted means of commerce, and so the Portuguese used it for much of their time as a colony, as a port to ship slaves out, as a gathering place. They had Angola, what we know now today as Angola, on the west coast, and Mozambique on the east coast. And it was primarily a slave trading port. Once Portugal signed on to not using slavery anymore, and that wasn't until the mid-1800s. Once they did that, then they began the process of plantations, agriculture, mining, and developing it almost as a subset or a southern part of Portugal. But still, the people of the land were not taken care of. You will see in Mozambique, in Maputo, the finest examples of colonial era architecture that exist on the continent. Most of the places have either let them fall apart or have torn them down. In Mozambique, this is the train station, still in use today. You'll see the government buildings, you'll see homes, you'll see the cathedral. Very, very beautiful examples of architecture, that Spanish, Portuguese architecture from the 1400s on. But Portugal used a colony as was expected to be used. It took, but it didn't give back. And so for the 400 and some odd years that they were a colonial power, the people never really moved out of the level that they were. They didn't get any of the benefits of electricity when it came, or medicine. They were treated as second-class servants and second-class people by the colonials. And today they still live not too differently from the way they lived even back then. In 1977, as across Africa, the whole independence movement had been sweeping since the 50s. Kenya, all of the other countries where the people rose up and said, enough, colonialism is dead, it's time for the future. Portugal was no different. In 1977, the first independence movement began there. And at first it was small. And the government, the Portuguese government, brutally repressed it. I mean, just took them out and shot them wherever they could find them. Because of the nature of colonialism and because of the time, 50s and 60s, Marxism, communism was the political force of the revolution, was the political force of outrage and anti-colonialism. And the Portuguese resisted, and they resisted mightily. And the more they resisted, as has happened all around the world, the more the people moved into Marxism and communism and accepted the doctrine. There were two groups fighting against the colonial powers. This war dragged on until 1992. It devastated the land. By 1980, all the Portuguese, or even half Portuguese people, left the country in fear of their lives. It was a war in which you did not take off your uniform. The color of your skin dictated which side you were on. It was pretty brutal and pretty awful. When the war ended in 1992 with the peace treaty that was signed in Rome, brokered by the European nations, there were only 5 engineers left in the whole country, which gives you, and of course, as a result, by 1992, the whole infrastructure of the country had completely collapsed. Nothing worked. No electricity, no running water. The roads were a mess. The train lines weren't functioning. The country was, in essence, broken and destitute. Towards the end of this war, it became a surrogate war. Because the rebels chose Marxism as their doctrine, the Western powers, the United States, Britain, Spain, Portugal, Rhodesia, and South Africa, supported the government, or what would be considered the anti-communist forces, pro-colonialism and anti-communist forces. And so the war got fought with more, everybody poured in weapons, advisors, terrible things happened. In the end, the peace treaty came and everybody kind of relaxed and said, okay, enough, please. It just sort of shuddered to a stop. What happened was that the rebel leaders, including the current president, took a look around the world and said, you know what, Marxism may not be such a great thing. Maybe communism isn't such a great thing, and they chucked it over onto the ash heap where it remains today for almost around the world. And they chose democracy. That was an unusual thing. Think about that. A communist regime decided to turn to capitalism and especially democracy. Ever since, it's been a functioning democracy with regular elections and elected representatives in government, and it's worked fairly well, except for one problem. It left the economy functioning really well. In fact, to this day, Mozambique has one of the highest GDP growth rates in Africa. It's the poster child for that. 8% growth per year. That's pretty darn good. Problem is, none of it filtered down. It didn't get down to the people at the lowest level. Why? Because corruption is a major issue. Not just corruption, but the groups that took power, the ones that didn't get in, decided to keep fighting. To this day, there is still warfare in two of the areas of the country, not near where we're going, and it's kind of sputtering along, not doing very much because the current regime has enough backing to keep it down. But there's also urban unrest, and a fair amount of it. Just in October, there was rioting. And again, that's not going to be a problem here because they telegraph. In Africa, it doesn't just break out like much of the world. It sort of, everybody says, well, you know, on this coming Saturday, we're going to take to the streets. And so they sort of telegraph it, and everybody gets ready, and the troops come on the street, and there's a bit of tire burning and rock throwing. Not a problem today. There have been elections that have been contested. There's talk of new elections. But in general, the country's pretty darn stable, except that the people don't have anything. The unemployment rate is probably at 60% or higher. People live as best they can. And remember, you have to look through these countries through their lens, not our lens. Not through the lens of history, but through the lens of reality. You know, they live comfortably as well as they can. They're not dying in the streets and being carted off in the morning. It's not too bad, except the people see the rulers and the upper class, if you will, driving into big cars and living in the big houses and making fortunes and saying, how about a little bit for us? All this prosperity should filter down to those of us on the other side of the fence. The current president, Mr. Guibuza, I was going to put in a picture of him with Fidel Castro, the ultimate rebel, the beard, the little cap, the fist raised and the power salute. He was a fierce leader of the rebellion. He was in the jungle. He was part of the Central Committee. And he was one of the guiding forces that said, let's drop Marxism and communism and let's move into more capitalism and democracy. In the process, he has become a millionaire. He's made a fortune in owning the airline, in transportation, in oil and oil research. The classic field commander turned fat cat. Is it unusual? No, it's happened everywhere. I spent a lot of time in Nicaragua. The same thing happened with the Sandinistas there. It's an exchange of power is all that happened. In the process, he made a mistake, I think, personal opinion here. He's forgotten about the people that put him there. And now he's faced with another problem. Up until the current generation that's now moving into their 20s, everybody was part of the armed struggle. They went through it. They fought in the streets. They went to the barricades. They were part of this grand revolution that overthrew the yoke of colonialism. The new generation was born after it. They don't have a feel for that. They really don't care too much about that. They want to talk about today and tomorrow. His government is not recognizing that. You'll probably hear young Mozambicans talk about that if you can get them to open up a little bit and talk to you about it. So he's going to have to deal with that and the ongoing struggle for, for control of the country, just like anywhere else. Okay, let's move into some useful stuff. That's Harry's quick background history lesson. The currency is the metacash. I'll say it after me, metacash. Metacash. Mostly referred to as a meta, or you'll see it advertised various ways. The rate currently, as of last night, is about 30 to 1. It's been to the US dollar, 30 metacash to $1. In the country, as is so often the case, they will be happy to accept dollars, pounds, rands, euros, almost any other kind of currency. There is no black market because the actual exchange rate is so good that there's no reason to have a black market. But to give you an example of how they have approached the economy here, in 2009, they decided that they were having just a lot of difficulty with the currency inflation, so they just printed new money with 2 zeros missing. So the prices have had to adjust to that. So how do you use this? Now, there are ATMs. You can also use your own money. But if you happen to be using metacash, remember that it's a stable currency, and it's 30 to 1 no matter what you're told otherwise. Everything in Mozambique that doesn't have a real price tag attached to it is open to negotiation. And you're going to do a lot of that if you're going to buy anything. You'll try not to laugh when they quote you the first price, but usually it's insane price, just to see where do we start the bargaining from. But don't get angry, because then you'll never get a good deal. Just laugh and go with it and bargain. If you approach bargaining as a game, it's a lot of fun. You understand that the first sale of the day is the most important. That's the one that sets the tone for the day. You understand that it's a game. They want to see how high they can keep you and how low you will be willing to go to meet the prices. And so you try to find that middle ground. Don't be afraid to walk away and come back. It's like bargaining anywhere else. The only place that's different is China. And those of you going on to China, if you don't know already, you will find you do not get a good deal from the Chinese. They've got 10,000 years practice on us. And you're just not going to get a good deal. Anyway, so lots of bargaining in Mozambique. Almost no one will have change for meticais. They probably are not going to have change for your euro or your dollar. So, I suggest that if you are planning on doing some shopping, try to have small bills of whatever currency you're going to use. And do not be afraid, if the opportunity presents itself, to use a recognized ATM in a good place, preferably in the front of a bank, or to go into a bank and get small change. Otherwise, you will lose the change because they'll just say, sorry, we don't have it. Or you could also probably try to debate or bargain enough to say, well, if I can't have change, can I have this piece as well? Let's see if they buy that. What do you buy with the money? What is Mozambique known for? They're famous for their wood carvings. You've seen wood carvings everywhere, but you're about to see some of the best wood carvings on the planet. They work a lot in exotic hardwoods, such as ebony, and some of the other really, the rosewoods, hardwoods, so the pieces are quite well done. There's several different kinds of carvings. There's the shetani, which are evil spirits, kind of like probably the ones on the left. And there's another form of carving called ujamaya, and that's more people and story of a family. They're exquisite. They sell on the streets. They'll be in the shops. Watch for that. One thing I caution with, being a woodworker myself, be careful of green wood. Green wood will feel differently. It might have aroma to it. If you pick it up, it's going to be heavier than you think it should be. Even with an ebony, if you can feel where it's not been coated, if there's a dampness to it, if the wood seems darker in one area than another, don't buy it. The reason being is when you get it home, it will shrink as the moisture goes out. And when wood shrinks, it can't give, so it cracks. And you may bring home one piece and end up putting 4 on the mantelpiece. Okay? So watch for that. Other than that, if you like wood carvings, this is a place to get it. Do remember that ebony is very heavy. And at 50 kilos per bag, you may find yourself hand carrying it onto the airplane or paying an extra fee. In addition, you can also find, of course, the beautiful fabrics of Africa, oftentimes with unique designs. Sometimes today they're manufactured in China, 2 designs created here. Connie and I have a rule, if you like it, buy it. And don't worry about where it comes from. If it pleases you, go ahead and get it. Now, over the next month, I'm going to talk off and on about gems in various countries. I am not a gemologist, but my wife was a jewelry designer for a while. And so kind of by osmosis, I picked up a lot. And what I picked up was one rule. Be really careful if you buy gemstones. There are so many fakes out there. Mozambique is known for rubies, tourmaline, a number of other stones, star rubies. They'll show you what they purport to be sapphires. Sometimes they're lab-grown. Rubies, for example, are very often heated to improve the color. If you don't know stones, if you don't carry a loupe with you and know to look at a stone, you want to be really cautious. You'll have people come up to you on the street and offer to sell you, ooh, special rubies just in from the countryside. Special price, oh, friends of Rick? Special price for you. You're probably going to be buying glass, or you're going to be buying fakes or altered stones. Use your own judgment. If you really see something you love, again, buy it. I mean, what the heck? If you're going to wear it, you love it. That's fine. Who cares what it is? You can tell them it's the star rubies of India. No one will know the difference, except a gemologist. But be careful. Use common sense again, okay? Now, talk about some of the more negative aspects. One of those is the police department. With any kind of luck, you're not going to run into the police for any reason at all. But if you do, you need to know a couple of things. To a man, they are almost all corrupt. They have a number of scams running. For one thing, you are required to carry a form of identification with you at all times in Mozambique if you are not a citizen. Okay, the ship will tell you what will work here. You probably aren't going to run into this. But if you should get stopped, A, do not hand over your passport, okay? You'll never see it again short of draining your bank account down to zero. If you have to go to the police department to report a theft for insurance purposes, take someone with you. Get back here to the ship. See if the ship can help you out with that. Work with the port agent. Do not go by yourself. Do not go alone. Do not offer a bribe. That's one of the things that'll come up and sort of hint at a bribe. Never offer a bribe. If they give you a lecture, listen to the lecture and say, what can we do about this? And then listen to the response. Generally, it's not very much. It could be as little as a Coca-Cola to cool their thirst, or a couple of $100 if it's a more serious offense. Just be alert. Be careful. Don't do anything stupid. I could say don't have unprotected sex because of AIDS, but then that doesn't apply to any of us, does it? In general, you want to be just cautious. They're not going to, none of us are going to be driving around in the countryside. The problem is more acute the further out from Maputo that you go. So you want to be, again, just as I always say, just use common sense. Be alert. Don't wear flashy jewelry. It's all the common stuff. Don't carry a big fat wallet in the back pocket. If you've got a bag, put it over your shoulder. Keep one hand on it. Be alert for the unexpected. If somebody bumps into you or spills something on you and starts to, oh, sorry, sir, there's going to be somebody behind you lifting things out. Okay? If something like that happens, or somebody else, it's an old classic, actually this is, it comes out of Hollywood, but it's very true. Someone yells, pickpocket, and everybody goes, and then pickpocket goes, oh, that's the one, that's where it is. Okay. So again, just use common sense, please. Now, tips, things to know, things to do, things not to do as a tourist in Mozambique. No water. Do not drink tap water under any conditions. And what's the corollary to that? Anyone? Ice. Thank you. Do not use ice. Do not accept a drink with ice, unless it's, I suppose, solid 100 proof, which nothing can live through. But seriously, do not use ice. It's just, it's a good, wise thing never to do. There are some risks. For example, if you're female, do not walk on the beaches alone. Well, heck, that would apply to California beaches, I suppose, and certainly many other places around the world. Again, common sense. In general, Mozambicans are warm and friendly and wonderful and welcoming, and you will have an absolutely magnificent time. Use the common sense, as I say. And the kids are terrific. Like I always put in a kid picture. Get used to seeing kid pictures. They're the best. They take the most fun photographs, and I think if you see happy, smiling kids, no matter what the conditions are, that's so much better than seeing a little baby that's not well, or kids sitting there glumly just watching you go by. It means that they're happy, that they're having a good time. And that's what you should do in Mozambique, is have a good time. See it up close. If you get a chance, talk to the people. If you have some time with the guide, ask them how they live. Get to know the country a little bit. And by all means, with the common sense in mind, be a great traveler. Thank you for coming, and I'll see you next time for Madagascar.